I feel if I had paid a bit more attention when I was a kid to how monetization in games were shifting, I probably would have never bought into digital-only copies of games back then when it was being pushed. With how AAA games have evolved in both their price and scope, it seems a lot of the higher-ups seems to want to keep pushing to figure out how to better monetize their games. And the current quote making the rounds right now is from Ubisoft's own Philippe Tremblay, who was the one directing the subscription services at Ubisoft, which is Ubisoft Plus, Premium, and Classics. Which, yeah, it's just Ubisoft's version of Xbox Game Pass, and apparently they're going to be adding Activision Blizzard games into the service as well. So he made some comments on how could video game subscriptions take up a larger portion of the market than they currently do, which led to this quote. I don't have a crystal ball, but when you look at the different subscription services that are out there, we've had a rapid expansion over the last couple of years, but it's still relatively small compared to the other models. He could be referring to Ubisoft's own subscription service here, or game subscription services in general not being as big as other industries. We're seeing expansion on console as the likes of PlayStation and Xbox bring new people in. On PC, from a Ubisoft standpoint, it's already been great, but we are already looking to reach out more on PC, so we see opportunity there. One of the things we saw is that gamers are used to, a little bit like DVD, having and owning their games. That's the consumer shift that needs to happen. They got comfortable not owning their CD collection or DVD collection. That's a transformation that's been a bit slower to happen in games. As gamers grow comfortable in that aspect, you don't lose your progress. If you resume your game at another time, your progress file is still there. That's not been deleted. You don't lose what you've built in the game or your engagement with the game, so it's about feeling comfortable with not owning your game. I still have 2 boxes of DVDs. I definitely understand the gamer perspective with that. But as people embrace that model, they will see that these games will exist and the services will continue, and you'll be able to access them when you feel like. That's reassuring. Streaming is also a thing that works really well with subscription, so you pay when you need it as opposed to paying all the time. Just based off of that quote, you can see that the guy's really trying to sell the game's subscription model as this really convenient service that gives you access to all the games that you want, whenever you want, and that you won't ever lose your access and can keep going where you left off. I hope you've been paying attention to the last few years of how these kind of services have gone, because that's kind of the opposite of what you tend to get long term with these kind of services. The history of how we've gotten to this point is filled with a lot of this kind of thing, where people will give companies an inch and they'll end up taking a mile. To give some perspective, companies have been trying to figure out how to get more money out of the games they release for years. The earliest attempt I could remember was the whole online pass situation to try and combat used game sales. Season passes also came out around this time too. One left while the other stayed. Then fast forward a bit more and you'll see loot boxes growing in prominence. Whether or not this was because of mobile games or Valve's games like TF2 and CS having a huge loot box economy is anyone's guess. But one thing's for sure, once these companies figure out how they can lock certain specific content behind this paywall and get away with it, they won't just stop at cosmetics. That's how you end up with Star Wars Battlefront 2 essentially making your own character progression locked behind random chance. That was the straw that broke the camel's back, but it took time to get to this point. Before that, we had plenty of games incorporate the loot box business model, and then with just this one game, it all practically vanished. And then we end up with the current business model that we are currently dealing with, which is the Battle Pass. A model that Fortnite ended up popularizing, and due to their insane level of success, has plagued the rest of the industry with dozens trying to copy it to our collective dismay. Now they want to monetize the entire idea of just having access to your games and disguise it under the idea that it's meant to be convenient. They're doing this for you. It's the sentiment that because games are played for hundreds if not thousands of hours, why shouldn't we charge you for that extra time? You don't even need to go that far back to find another person saying similar things. Just look at Take-Two CEO Strauss Zelnick, who's of the opinion that games should be priced based on how long you play them, how long they took to develop them, or in some cases, both. Games as a service has gotten to the point where these guys can do all the mental gymnastics necessary to argue that the game itself is a service worth charging people for enjoying. And while Zelnick says they don't have the power to enforce a standard like that, that doesn't mean they won't try and plant the seeds to make it seem like it's okay to keep inching towards that direction. As long as they keep gaining some inches bit by bit and don't get huge backlash for what they're doing, like at the Battlefront 2 level, they can keep changing things slowly until you suddenly blink and realize that you're paying a subscription just to access your normal games. MMOs are kind of the first thing that comes to mind when it comes to a subscription service to access a particular game, but I think MMOs are an exception to this crazy rule because MMOs have the reputation to back up their business model. MMOs do tend to last a very long time, and it's the ones that are done without the insane monetization schemes that end up being some of the biggest around. I don't know about you, but whenever I play an MMO and most of the time playing it I'm being advertised a damn cash shop, I just know I'm not going to be playing it much at all. You can just tell with these games which ones are going to last and which ones are not, just based off how they try to balance the game with its monetization. Not only has the current AAA industry not proven that they deserve to be trusted with not letting us own our own games, we already have had enough bad examples of streaming services losing value over time once it did get massive adoption. For example, back to Tremblay, he tries to say that CDs and DVDs are already having a shift to a more digital form, implying that it's also a shift that needs to happen to games, but that it's just happening slower because people really want to own their games. But I feel the thing that's being missing here is the fact that no one is arguing that these services aren't good for what they offer. It's that there's no guarantee you'll get to keep or access anything that you actually wanted to access. Hell, just look at movies. When Netflix started its streaming service, practically everything was on there. What made Netflix appealing was that everything was in one place compared to cable, and you only needed to pay one subscription and you got no ads. Once mass adoption happened, however, more and more companies started dipping out of Netflix and either joined a competitor or started their own service entirely. And there's nothing indicating that the same won't happen with these game services. Sure, when it comes to the big ones like Microsoft, EA, or Ubisoft, the games they own might always be there, but it's all the third-party stuff that will just end up going the way of Netflix. Hell, sometimes even their own first-party games don't even stay on the service. Just look at PlayStation. With PlayStation Now, a lot of Sony's first-party games go on and off on that service all the time. Some of them are just gone forever. And that's ultimately why these services will never become the main way anyone plays these games, because people put way too much time into their games for a company to then decide they can't have it anymore. The idea that a company can just shut a game down and lock the game away forever will never sit right with the consumer. Even with MMOs, that usually doesn't last forever because fan projects and revival projects will always come up if the game was good enough and preserve that game forever. That can't happen if the game is only accessible via a subscription or a streaming service, and I feel like they're banking on that being the case too. Like, a lot of these things don't sound like a big deal until 10 or 20 years pass and you realize a good chunk of the games you used to enjoy were shut down or locked away forever with no way of ever getting them back. Or a good chunk of their content is inaccessible for new players because they weren't around when the current season of the Battle Pass was happening. Honestly, I feel it should be standard for any of these games, if they were to shut down or be taken off whatever service they were on, that everyone should be refunded for their purchases in said game, or said game gets an offline version put out instead, with the option of letting the community run their own servers. But we all know they're never gonna want to let that happen. Anyway, that's about all I gotta say about this current topic in the gaming industry. Let me know what you thought of in the comments, and give this video a like if you can. Until next time, have a good one.